Hey everybody, and welcome to your next. I'm your host Jerome. I say that you're in a treat for a treat the majority of these episodes, but Paul is my new best friend. He and I have been chatting, and just the way that he dives in and connects with people in the moment is second to none. I imagine Paul's never met a stranger, but Paul's had a few exits. I don't think he's going to talk about most of them. He's probably only going to talk about one. But with that said, Paul Farrell, thank you so much for making time for us today and joining me on the podcast.
Well, Jerome, it's a pleasure to talk to you, to get to know you. I feel like we're fast friends here for the first 15 minutes we talked, and I look forward to talking with you and sharing my experiences with your audience.
Now, I usually open these up with, so you had an exit, and the majority of guests say yes, and so I think you'll say the same.
Yeah. I've been blessed by God to have a few of them. We've turned around a $440 million NASDAQ traded firm early on. I learned a lot through that. I bought a big data firm from VeriSign in 2009, London-based, and sold it to Reed Elsevier LexisNexis in 2014. And then we were in the cybersecurity industry, and we sold that one um, at the end of COVID, mid to end of COVID. But there's been some tuck-ins along the way, and where you need a product and somebody has it, and so you buy another firm to add it to yours and stuff like that.
So let's go to the most recent one because doing deals during COVID was pretty tough. Was that just how you drew it up into the dirt? Like, did you plan for COVID? And when you bought that company, did you
Oh
know there was
no!
going
Oh
to
my
be a
God!
global?
No, you never plan for COVID. But it was all it was a super high flyer, and the circumstances came down that my funding went away on just natural causes. You can't blame anybody. And I had sold a company. And that was supposed to give me enough money to make it to the end. It was a $16 million sale that we had tucked in that we grew up and then spun out. And the intent was to use that money to power the cybersecurity firm to wherever we need to go, which would be more than enough money for decades. Um, but what happened was through just a lot of circumstances, the person we sold it to defaulted on it. And my wife, who's the CPA in the family, and is not as risk averse as her husband, we were funding it. And when I got to a certain level, she just put her foot down and said, "No more. We're not going to put our whole retirement into this thing." And so that started the sales process, and then we found a sale. But it's all good because that's sometimes it goes smoothly. Like the one before, the big data company I bought, London based, that was a classic textbook. Buy a company, turn it around, sell it at the right time. People knocking on my door. This one was a little different, and every time you have one, they're all different, and we learn different lessons from them. So that's the unique thing about it.
So was the cybersecurity your biggest financial exit?
Oh, no, not at all, because it was a good, they all been exits, which is amazing, right? That's a blessing from God. But there's been other ones that have been greater based upon the way we came in and went out. But they're all good, man. If you can build something up and exit without shutting it down, then you're blessed. And part of this thing is gratitude for what's going on. And sometimes in the fire, you can't have gratitude, but it's a thing you should always grab for. Look, I get to be CEO of this company. I get to shepherd these people that are working for me. I get to make their dreams come true, people's dreams that work for you. And that's a big responsibility, but also a huge pleasure on the back end when things pay off. And by the way, everybody got a home, right? On that one. We didn't, it was a little tough sledding for a while, but we made it through.
And so I ask about the liquidity size because I find most people struggle a little bit after their big exit, and work optional is a thing for them. You mentioned, hey, we're not going to put our whole retirement in a thing, and you talked about the big turnaround in the beginning. Did you ever have any of those challenges of like, does my life matter anymore on the backside of
Uh,
an exit?
yeah, yeah, you all do. All right, listen, nobody tells you that they don't, they don't. So the first big exit opportunity we had is I was had a little ISP called AOL. Maybe a young guy like you might remember instant messaging because it was the way you chatted with your friends before there was text messaging. Yeah, you're shaking your head. My wife prayed me into that opportunity because I was doing startups and I thought, oh, this ISP thing's not going to work. And I can give you a long, long story, but the net of it was I take a flight home from LA next to a executive vice president. He needs somebody with commercial experience, has a job in mind, wants to hire me. I tell my wife about it, and she goes, "Thank God. I'm tired of you working for these startup firms with no benefits and hardly even know their name, and you're traveling all the time. And I've been praying. I've been praying for you to get a job, a local job." And of course, I live in DC, and they were in DC area. And what happened was, all through the process, she's encouraging me, and I'm like, at the end, here's what happened. I got this job offer, and this was the late '90s. And there was a significant difference, a $50,000 difference between what I was making and what the offer was. But the bogey for them was they gave me a bunch of stock, right? And so I come home and I said, Lynn, what do you want to do? And she said, take the job. I'll manage the home on less. And I'm like, great. And guess what? That stock split 4 times. So, it was a first big financial reward in our family. Now, for those guys that have that, um, it's just a number in the bank account, which you can't explain to them, right? And you got to have your identity outside of your company and stuff, but it all gets mashed up together, Um, and um, and so one of the things that Lynn and I have been really enjoyed a lot is being philanthropic with it, you know. And it really does have a double blessing. Like you get twice as much back as you give away, and there's tons of applications of that I can tell you about, but it's not the purpose of this. But the purpose of this is, look, I I just went right on to the next one every time in my life. So starting after AOL 2003, we turned around a $440 million NASDAQ traded company. Then we went on to a Microsoft reseller that didn't work. We just shut it down because it just didn't have the profit. Then I went on to the big data company. And then coming out of that, the chairman said, hey, I'll go into cybersecurity. I don't like the solutions I'm seeing, and you guys could do better. But all along the way, each one of those exits has a different feel to it. And then the last one, let me see, that was right at COVID. I was about 60 years old. I'm 67 now. Um, and I just thought I was going to go do 2 more startups. And then God said, no, I'm going to make you lay down for a while. And that's where I had to stop. And I could give you a bunch of stories where doors just started slamming that weren't normally slammed. And I got the idea is, oh, God wants me to slow down. And I taught myself how to sleep again. But also, I think it was the main thing of my identity outside of a CEO, a startup CEO. This thing you're talking about where you grab for your identity. Now, I want to tell you all that, but also it's all overlapping because after AOL, Lynn and I financed all the college educations for our nieces and nephews. It was a huge blessing. And then after that, we decided that the net 50% of everything we made was going to be given away. And we are so happy for it today. I don't need a second home because if you have a second home, this woman that I love is going to be in the second home on a weekend and I'm going to be away from her. I don't want that. You know how, like, just by circumstances that works. You're married, you're in love. So we've given 50% away. Every major check, every time we got it, and just come, you have a washout sheet that says, here's the sale price, and here's all these people get paid, and everybody gets paid down the line, and employees get this much, and bonuses were this much, and all that. My chunk, net 50% tax, would go to a donor advised fund that we would give away over the next few years. And part of this is the advantage of it is seeing doing good in society and for people who are less advantaged. I mean, I grew up in a poor family, seven of us in like a 1,300 square foot house with one bathroom, right? I mean, I paid my way through college. And we wanted to give the opportunity of college to all our nieces and nephews. We got to do that at that time. And then even beyond that, there's people like today, as we speak, and you don't realize this, but there's people that are suffering because it's $5 a gallon for gas, because they live in neighborhoods and they have jobs that means that they can't make it at the end of the month. And I think having that light turned on, that there's people that need help and that you can help them in many different ways. And it's financial. And if you don't have financial, you can service people. But to understand that not everybody is as be grateful for what you have and realize that not everybody is as well off as you are, because $5 a gallon gasoline, it doesn't bother us, right? We go to, okay, it might, if you're on a budget, it might cramp you a little bit, but it's not, you're not missing a meal at the end of the month. And so my thing to the people who are exiting is it's a process. You need to think about it in advance. We haven't even got there about when you like why I say no sometimes when people tried to buy me because the firm wasn't ready to be sold. You talk about coming down the mountain. You got to come down the mountain. You got to plan your path. If you're skiing or whatever, you got to understand I'm going to take the blue to the green to the whatever. And if you're out in the west, it's an hour and a half, an hour 45 to get down the mountain. Well, the same thing happens in your business that, how are you going to get through the due diligence? Is your team ready to keep the sales up, which you have to do during a sales process, right? Because the second if your sales dip, they're gonna crush you on sales price. Sales up and also do all the due diligence. So I had one due diligence process where we had 72 people in the company, and the due diligence team for the person that was buying us had 92 because they're US and UK. So they had 92 people firing questions at 72 people whose full-time job really was to keep revenue running and the ships going and answer all the due diligence questions.
That seems painful.
It is, and it always takes longer than you expect, right? And but what the point is we do things in community. To have good advisors around you is key. People have been there before, I think, is a really key to this. And sound people, because it's not always about the biggest offer. You got to think about your employees and are they going to be the best taken care of with this offer? Are you going to be able to care for them? Are they going to be cared for in the next company? Is the next company buying them and they're going to just lay them all off in the next year or two? You don't want that. These are people that you built, sweat in the trenches with, you know. So I'm sorry, we've been like I typically do, Jerome. You're learning me now. We just went in 15 different directions in 3 minutes. And so pick up where you want to go and we'll pull a thread from there.
No, I think it's all cohesive and it, it's in a place that we haven't spent much time on the show. And I actually want to go deeper on it. So,
Okay.
how how'd you learn to be so generous?
My family. Like when we had nothing, we realized that there was people poor, and my mom and dad modeled giving. And if you couldn't give money, you could show up and serve. And that all the everybody in our family worked. Like we all had part-time jobs in high school. And yeah, that's how you put clothes on your back. And by the way, anybody was always welcome at our table. Like if you were my friend, Jerome, I brought you home, my mother would gladly cook for you. I could bring three friends home and she would just find the food, and big Italian, my mom was, and she would just make a big deal and everybody eat. Now, sometimes she would look at the boys, me and my two other brothers. I have two brothers and two sisters. She'd look at the boys a certain way, which meant no seconds tonight because this was a surprise, you dropping in on us. But it was always more than enough. And so it was modeled in the core family, and that you always serve or give back. And, so that's what I've done my whole life, even through college. Same thing, continue to serve while I was working a couple different jobs to put myself through school.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you live in a space of abundance when you came from. what you described as not a lot of means. And
Mhm.
although you describe it as all there always was enough, regardless of who showed up at the table. But it seems like many people they get access to the money on their liquidity event, and they're scared they're going to be poor again, and they work really hard to hoard the money that they receive, and that doesn't seem to be a concern or an issue for you.
No, um, I trust in God, and He's always taken care of me, even to today. Investments I made long ago pay off. Timing is always perfect. So I mean that's one thing, but the other thing is that you realize that I talked about a double blessing, and that's where you give it away, but you get a blessing back. Um, and this is in a book, so I can talk about it. But even though coming out of AOL, we had enough money for our kids to go to college, I'm like, no, we're good stewards of money. You got to apply for scholarships. And my son Patrick, um, um, typical teenage boy, kind of didn't want to do the extra work to do all these scholarships, but it was like, hey, no, you have to do it. And he won a scholarship to Vanderbilt, which was tuition only, but it's a huge number. Even Vanderbilt's a great university, it's a huge number. And then it was kind of funny the way God works because I'm trying to shorten up the story for our length here, but when we never counted the money we gave away, but a couple months after he won the scholarship, I was sitting down just in the back of my head saying, so much went here, so much went here, so much went here. And the money we gave away to our nieces and nephews roughly equaled 4 years of scholarship at Vanderbilt. And so when God starts doing stuff like that for you, man, you got to pay attention. And it's also, I think that with additional homes and cars and stuff becomes additional stress. And I want to drive a free life, and we live pretty peacefully. We've downsized. We live in an 1,800 square foot, two-bedroom, two-bath condo in Rosalind, Virginia. And we're very happy. We walk a lot of places. We have a dog, you know, it's fun.
Were you ever caught up in the more?
Oh, of course, it's when you first make money, you spend it like it's going out of style. Of course you do. But then you've got to catch yourself and realize, because you make enough where you can give it away and still have an abundance left over. And then because we're all human, right? And a human tendency is to, like, oh yeah, let's take this vacation, let's do this, let's do that. And all of a sudden, though, you get it right. Well, what are we getting out of all this? And what are we doing? And what's really, really important to us? And I say us because you and I talked beforehand. It's if you're married, it's a joint decision, right? It's a husband and wife kind of agreeing on how much to give away and agreeing on what do you need to live on and what's going to be the appropriate amount, and then to trust the process. And a lot of the thing, the hard part is that trust the process, right? You're going to give it away, but you know that there's going to be double blessings along the way. Even if there isn't, you're going to be okay.
This is very interesting because what happened? Like, what was the moment where you caught yourself and realized that there was enough and more wasn't the answer?
Um, I don't know. I don't know if it was at my point in time or a season of, your kids are in private school and it's really expensive. You're living in a big house on 5 acres in DC with a swimming pool and a tennis court. And even though you're giving your house away to ministry causes all the time, there's a lot of money coming in, going out. And then you realize that, like a big house requires a lot of attention. And I grew up the way I grew up, Jerome, like I didn't want to pay an electrician to come in and do some stuff. I just do it myself, but which took me twice as long on weekends. And I was traveling, trying to run companies. And then people walk into your neighborhood and they automatically jump the bill by 2 to 3x because you live on 5 acres in Vienna and you got all this stuff. And it was fun. And, I will tell you, I do miss one thing. I'm going to raise my hand and say I do miss one thing about the big house. I had my own CrossFit gym. So rubber floor, squat rack, bikes, rowing machine, full complement of kettlebells, TV, mirrors on the wall. But you know what? I walked two-tenths of a mile down to Gold's Gym and it's all there. So, it's you do miss some stuff, but you just realize along the way it's your own priorities and what you think you need. And hoarding doesn't help because you're holding on so tight, it's controlling your life. Let go.
It almost sounds like things felt wasteful at some point for you.
It
Like
they did. When you look back on it, when private school, new cars, and hey, oh yeah, let's just go to dinner 2 nights a weekend. And oh yeah, that new restaurant is, oh, who cares what it costs? And that and I'm telling you, it's human. You're gonna go through that. Just gotta catch yourself. And like earlier I said, to have mentors that care about you and pour into you, that we all have blind spots. Well, and I gotta do a shout out to a guy named Todd Bramlett. Todd Bramlett was my co-founder, and Todd had me covered on my blind spots. He was more of a chief operating guy, president, and he kept, while I was out running around selling and flying around a lot of different places, he kept the place running. And you need people on your staff to cover the blind spots. And that's how you get down the mountain, like your analogy. You got to have a really solid process of people internally that are taking care of the customers and getting the bills out on time and doing all these things as well. The sales are happening. It takes a team, and one person can't do it. And part of the thing I'm participating in this thing called Tiber Leadership, where we do, it's like a C12 forum, or you must know CEO co-founder forums. And one of the things that I just started a new group in Tiber Leadership with a great guy named Jim Hadley. And one of the things you realize is those CEO forums where CEOs get together and co-founders and senior execs and talk about the problems, that's very helpful because you're not the only guy that has the problem, right? There's 12 or 15 other people. And my best performing team of all time, bar none, was when I was a senior. I worked my way up to senior vice president at AOL, and I had people schooled on different continents with different backgrounds, and they were the best problem solvers in the world. I had 6 people. Some came out of Eastern Asia, some came out of Africa, some were schooled in London, schooled in the United States, in different schools in the United States. But diversity, oh my God, if I would tell the CEOs out there today, if you look around your team and you see everybody that looks and acts like you, go find somebody that's different. I'm serious, man. Is the best thing you can do to get down the mountain, as you say. Go find diversity, because diversity of thought, diversity of culture, man, this is what will give you the best going forward. Um, a famous person once said that I was teaching in this type of leadership. We were talking about radical candor, always saying the truth no matter what. And as a CEO, like sometimes, well, like maybe that person didn't do so well on this interview for the podcast. I got to cut that out. I got to do this. But you're not radically candor about it. But in an executive environment, when you have radical candor, um, he who knows the most truth wins. And so when you have that feeling in the meeting, like, oh, I don't believe this forecast, but Susie and Johnny and the sales team, they have worked so hard to put this together and they're really sincere. But I think there's some holes in it. And 6 months later, when it doesn't come in, it's going to be a lot harder. Where if you just say, and there's always content, what you're talking about, in context. You can't use stuff like you want to, in your organizations, really want to stop out rumors and stories like sales blew it. Well, sales didn't blow it last quarter. That's gossip, and it goes around the firm like wildfire, and it goes to your competitors. No, sales missed their number by 10%, but we figured out that one big deal didn't come in, and we didn't get a renewal, but we have a plan for it. That's the truth. And that makes people feel better than like sales did it, or So eliminating gossip, but also with this radical candor that you have a feeling like in your gut. I can tell by the way your eyes are moving and stuff. You get feelings, man. You're a feeling guy. I can tell that right away. And when somebody's telling you something, you know whether it's the truth or not, or you know that you need to dig deeper. Well, in meetings, for all the CEOs out there, that's the same thing. And get a culture, because it just can't be you practicing radical candor. Your whole executive team needs to practice radical candor, because he who knows the most truth wins. And you're going to get out the most truth by everybody in the table saying the truth. And then when I just added another layer on it with diversity, you get a lot more diversity of thought, which leads you to the truth faster.
So let's take that from running a company and use it as board members, because you're doing a lot of advisory work, if I
Mhm.
understand that correctly now. And so, how are you using this concept with companies you're putting capital in and you're helping guide and advise?
Well, because all the things we talk about, I talk about with my CEOs. So my best board positions aren't really board positions. My preferred way of doing things, Jerome, is to have breakfast with the critical people, CEOs, founders, and the breakfast can last 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And we sit down once every 4 to 6 or weeks and we go through everything, which for me is just not only work, but what's going on in your family? What are your kids doing? How's your relationship with your wife? This all affects you and your startup, right? And your company. I go through everything. And then for the next 4 or 5 weeks, I get text messages when it needs to happen. And the good news is God's given me a rich history. So when your main developer quits, what should be the plan of action? Well, the plan of action is this is going to happen. No one person is going to determine you need to understand why they're going to quit. And it's like you're in a startup, but he's got one baby they just had, and he's having this, or she is having her second baby. And we can't pay them because he's going to go double his salary in the market. Well, you should hug him and say, hey, I understand you're doing this for your family. And I understand you can't afford to stay here. Thank you so much for what you did before. Help me find your replacement as good as you. And you move forward and it all works out. But in the moment when they quit, you're like, oh my God, we're not going to make the next release and whatever. And so, since I've seen this playbook a few times, when you call your mentors, you call your board members, these are the things that we get to share with you is like, we've been there, right? Through the hard decisions and stuff. So,
So it's taking your lived experience and then applying that across the problems that are coming
yeah.
up for the people that you're guiding.
Which is the key thing is you apply your lived experiences, but you don't lose the human part of it. We work with humans. We work with feelings. We work with emotions. We work with dreams and plans. And so you can solve a business problem, but then you got to say, okay, now what's that second layer? What's the emotion that's going on here? What's happening? So what I'm saying is it takes two. It takes not just a business solver, because right now you could go to ChatGPT or Claude. I love Claude. I've spent a lot of time in Claude. Whatever it is for you, Grok or whoever, um, they can give you great business advice, but they can't give you that layer of, also what's going on, knowing the personalities, knowing the CEO, the president, the head of development, the head of sales, the head of marketing, the individual staff people, and understanding where they want to go.
So as you've been on this journey, I mean, you've seen a ton of people. Are you teaching or are you finding that founders that demonstrate generosity are having more success kind of in the
I
same
can't
mold
say
that you
that I
have?
have empirical proof for that, but it's success. So how do you define success is what I would say, because I always sign all my emails, and you've seen a couple from me. I always say God's peace, which is shalom, which is, in my mind, that's the most important thing to have in your family, in your corporation, and with the people around you. That I'm comfortably in who I am, where I am right now in the world where God has me. I've got this peace. It's different than just detente. Like, we get an agreement on the straight of humors, right? And that's not the same because that peace is not lasting, right? I'm talking about lasting peace, which is, we can sit down and talk and converse as friends, and you might have a different view than me, but I know you because I've been in a community with you and I respect you. And so it's not this social media crap that goes on. Like, you know, so it's about community and it's about family and it's about being together and then respect. I respect for, where you're coming from. And then this is one of the other things that we talk about. A lot of this is in a book I read. I mean, it helped manifest a lot of things that I do. It's called 15 Commitments of a Conscientious Leader, but it's it's that catching yourself when anger arises or, oh, you're attacking my authority or whatever. They call it above the line and below the line. That's some of it, but it's also this radical candor, eliminating gossip, and taking radical responsibility. There's a whole bunch of concepts that are people concepts because we deal with people all the time, and we have this corporation. But I got a great story. If you, I don't know what how are we on time? I got a really great story about people. Can I share it with you? So
Absolutely.
where the big data company was 50% in the United States, and we had an office in Dayton and had an office here in DC, and we also had an office in London. And Nigel, who was a great IT guy, um, came to me because whenever I went to any locations, I'd leave the door open for a couple hours and you could just come in and talk to me. We didn't have that big of corporations. And Nigel's like, "Hey, Paul." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Will you move me to Dayton because I want a horse farm?" Because he's a kid who grew up in London, right? And I looked at him and I said, "Sure, it's my job to help you make your dreams. This is why I always believed it." And so we spent the money to get him a green card for the United States. So he can come to the United States and work RIT in Dayton, Ohio, and buy a farm outside. And so it was 2 years later, doors opened again. I'm in Dayton, and Nigel come in, and here's a guy, I mean, wasn't prone to crying. But he starts crying in front of me. I'm like, "Oh my God, Nigel, what's wrong? Somebody died. What can I do for you? Is there somebody have a terminal disease? How can we help you?" And he looked at me and he said, "I found out I don't like mucking stalls at 4:30 in the morning and going to work." And I know what I said to him, Jerome? I said, "Praise God. You know what, Nigel? You can go back. We'll send you back to London. Our job as CEOs is to help you have that experience. You'll never forget that experience. His job was great, but our job is to find out where our people want to go and help them get there." I had somebody in Nehemiah. She, wanted to go to England the other way. And I think she's still there in Scotland someplace. But, another fantastic story. It's what happens. And it's about people.
Yeah, I find that most people aren't interested in the people, they're interested in the people's productivity. And I imagine that the people that you've worked with over the years still reach out to you when your relationship as your formal arrangement is over because you actually cared about them as people.
Yeah,
And that's the
of
real
course.
impact. You've mentioned faith a lot during the this episode. Was there a moment where all this became real for you, or is this something that you've been just living out since you were a kid? Like, how
Oh
did
no,
it become such a prevalent part of your life?
well, great question. Thank you for asking. So I grew up Catholic, and I love the Catholic faith, but after 40 years in it, I transferred over to more evangelical faith. And I really came to know, we in this part of the world believe in Jesus Christ. And I really came to know him better when I was at AOL and I had a customer, and it's a long story, but they asked me to sell a solution to everybody that came through the door, and it affected earnings. And then there was a big person from the SEC and the Department of Justice and stuff came down to AOL. And there was, they wanted to know what was going on, and I was in the middle of this chaos after I left AOL. I turned down the CEO job of a $440 million NASDAQ traded company because that was going on at the time. And it was a lot of stress. See, my whole life, Jerome, I could talk my way out. I'm a pretty smart guy. I was relying on Paul Farrell powers, right? I could talk my way out, work my way out, somehow figure how to get out. And this was a situation where um, I was up every night, worried, half out of my wits about being, I had written emails like, I'm doing what you told me to do. And a persecutor gets that prosecutor and he says, oh, that shows you're complicit. And I'm like, no, 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 it wasn't. And so they were trying to put me in jail, and for the first time, I realized what real faith was. I was on my knees and had to rely on God. And that was my big transition in life, that I realized that I can do good things by myself, but so much more with him, so much greater, so much more in tune to people, right? That was a big part of my transition that happened in the early 2000s.
Wow.
And by the way, I'll give you the end of the story is I got immunity and walked in and was able to, tell everybody what the truth was. And long story, people went to jail eventually, but had to spend like 3 days on the stand and lots of other stories that we can talk about at another time.
Ooh. It reminds me of the Surrender Experiment book by Michael Singer, and he talks about like he gets raided by the feds,
Hmm.
and like he thinks he's going to jail. He goes through all the court, but he just got to that place where he just surrendered and
Yeah.
gave in.
And that's what it is.
And
It's not about us and how we do it. And, we all like to think that, we did it, but no, I've been really blessed. Jerome, I grew up in the family I grew up into, and I go to college and I decide to take a sixth course in computing, develop the programming. And so I get out of college, at a college that doesn't even have a computing degree, and I have a BS in finance and 8 programming courses. And of course, I get 2 offers, one to work in a bank in Buffalo, and then one that was twice that to program. And that was God's plan on my heart. That I've been in technology ever since then. But when you go back and you look retrospectively, you could see these things that were for my benefit that I didn't even know. I didn't realize the years later that I got on my knees and said, "Thank you, Lord, for it's 20% more, and I was paying tuition myself, right? I mean, to go to college, and that was in 1977, taking programming courses, well before you were even around, my friend, well before."
yeah, I don't know about that. I think I'm older than what you think I am, but that's okay. Paul, this has been phenomenal, man. I like to wrap these up by asking one question, but before I do that, if the people want to get closer to you, what's the best way for them to learn about what you have going on?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. That's a great way to reach out there. Paul at Patter Holdings. And Patter's a Latin term that's for father. That's one way to get a hold of me. And probably there'd be the best way because I can take them all in and based upon what you want, I can refer you to other people or give you my personal cell phone to text me or email address or something like that. Of course, if it's important and it's a really serious thing, they can contact you, and you have the right to give them my cell phone and email if that's what you think is needed in the situation. Because sometimes they can't wait for 2 weeks to get through the LinkedIn, right? Where I can get there and get through all the messages. If it's important and you need to talk, then I'm here to help. That's what I do all day long. I go help people all day long. I came from a CEO meeting right before this, and in the morning I had another phone call, and that's what I love to do. It's the fusion of faith and business, And it's so much fun being able to put the two of them together.
And so the final question is, we've covered a lot of ground. You said 15 different directions. I don't think we actually went that far, but what's the one thing you want the listeners to take away from the episode?
Each one of you, everybody, every listener out there, has the ability to do more than they think. And I think in life we imagine ceilings that are not there. And I'm not talking, I'm when I'm talking fulfilled life, I'm talking about this piece that I shared, this, family that, your family, you're together at the dinner table lasts like 2 hours because you're just enjoying each other. That's what I like to leave them with, is that you all have the ability to do to do that. And it's just transforming your mind, right? To be clued into the people. Because if you get the people right in your company, you get the culture right in your company, you're going to go places, and that's what I'm going to say. The financial returns come after you get the culture and the people right.
Wow, I love it. All right, y'all. This was a great episode. I learned a ton and just digging into this concept of being generous, being here to serve. Paul's a living example of it. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity for all of us to step into more of that so that we can actually have the fulfilled life or the life of significance that I believe most of us are chasing. Paul, thank you again for being on the show.
You're welcome. What a pleasure, Jerome.
And to our listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.